There's joy in the heavens.
Squeeze. So, you are. It is fun to do things.
There's joy in the heavens, a smile on the mountains, and melody sings everywhere. There's always nothing to welcome you, boy. Your soul is as free as the air. The flowers are all looking to welcome you, morning. Your soul is as free as the air. There's joy in the sunshine, dance through a meadow, or sit by a stream and just be. The water will gather your words and carry them down to the sea. The river of the water will gather your words and carry them down to the sea. It's only the pump that they found. This fish goes for hope that you might. The doorway to joy will be found. Desires of the shackles, hope that you might. The doorway to joy will be found. There's joy on we've only this moment. That's for the finding of freedom, riches can do. There's joy in the heavens, a smile on the mountains, and melody sings everywhere. So all into your soul is as free as the air. Welcome to morning. Your soul is as free as the air. The flowers are all open to welcome the morning. Your soul is as free as the air.
Let's do a couple of chants together. Our first chant is God Christ Guru. It's number 18. Italian words. They're in the book. So just follow along until you can get them. We'll sing English, Italian, and then back to English again. Sitting up straight. Take some deep breaths. Feel yourself focusing at the heart. Chanting has opened our hearts. And let's take that energy of the heart and lift it up to the spiritual eye. Broadcasting there to God. Reveal thyself. Reveal thyself. And we'll sit in the silence, feeling that all-enveloping presence with us for about 5 or 6 minutes. If you find yourself distracted by anything else, just gently bring your focus back to the spiritual eye.
Om Shanti Shanti. Keeping your mind inwardly focused, listen to these words from Swami Kriyananda's book, Affirmations for Self-Healing. Our affirmation for this week is joy. True joy is not an emotional state. It is not that which one feels when some desire is satisfied or when everything at last goes well. It is inward. It is of the soul. It can be developed first by not reacting emotionally to outward things. Don't be tossed on alternating waves of success and failure. Don't join in their excitement, the buyers and sellers in the marketplace of this world. Be calm in yourself, even-minded and cheerful through the gains and losses of life. Then in calm, deep meditation, feel the joy of the soul. Hold on to that joy through all activities. Don't confine it, but try ever to expand it until your little joy becomes the joy of God. And we'll affirm together a few times, first out loud, then a little more quietly, then in a whisper, and finally silently together. We'll affirm. I am even-minded and cheerful at all times.
I am even-minded and cheerful at all times.
I know that joy is not outside me, but within.
I know that joy is not outside me, but within.
A little softer. I am even-minded and cheerful at all times.
I am even-minded and cheerful at all times.
I know that joy is not outside me, but within.
I know that joy is not outside me, but within.
And now in a very soft voice, I am even-minded and cheerful at all times.
Even-minded and cheerful.
I know that joy is not outside me, but within.
I know that joy is not outside me, but within.
Now focusing your mind at the spiritual eye, mentally say the words there, silently. I am even-minded and cheerful at all times. I know that joy is not outside me, but within. One more time silently. I am even-minded and cheerful at all times. I know that joy is not outside me, but within. Silently follow along in this prayer that Swami gave to us for joy. In the calmness of meditation, at the heart of my inner peace, help me to feel thy thrilling, joyful presence. Om Shanti Shanti. I do the reading. Okay. The reading for this week is number 38. Intuition is simple. The intellect is complex. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 10, we read a passage that Yogananda often quoted. And they brought young children to him, that he should touch them. And his disciples rebuked those that brought them. But when Jesus saw it, he was much displeased, and said unto them, Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God. Verily I say unto you, whosoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, he shall not enter therein. It has often been noted that a critical attitude tends to paralyze creativity. Good critics, for example, seldom produce works of creative genius, though their creations may be intellectually clever. The intellect separates. It analyzes, then puts things together again, piece by piece. Intellect lacks intuition's flow, which descends smoothly like a river from the superconscious. Paramahansa Yogananda described intuition as, quote, the soul's power of knowing God, end quote. To receive the kingdom of God, Jesus was saying, one must do so with the openness and trust of a little child. Intellectuals may object to this statement, saying, but there must also be discrimination. You wouldn't want a person to be so open-minded that his brain falls out. The truth is, however, that the intellect can be fooled, even when it does its best to discriminate wisely. Only intuition is capable of penetrating to the heart of the matter and knowing truth from falsehood. It was the clear understanding of a child, not the elaborately persuaded intellects of his elders, that enabled the child in Hans Christian Andersen's story to cry out in surprise, why isn't the emperor wearing any clothes? Therefore, it was that Sri Krishna said in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, to you who are free from the carping spirit, I shall now reveal wisdom sublime. Grasping it with your mind and perceiving it by intuitive realization, you shall escape the evils of delusion. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om. Om. Om.
My reading glasses seem to have disappeared. Where is it? Oh. This reading is from Whispers from Eternity, Yogananda's book of prayer poems. Teach me, O Spirit, by meditation, to stop the storm of breath, the skipping of my mental restlessness, and all the sensory disturbances that rage on the lake of my mind. Let the magic wand of my intuition halt the gale of passions and unnecessary desires. In the rippleless lake of my mind, then, let me behold the undistorted reflection of the moon of my soul, glistening ever with the reflected light of thy presence. Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Nyaswami Omprakash. This is Nyaswami Premshanti, and it's very much a joy for us to be here in Wickford, Rhode Island, once again. I'd like to talk about intuition, the most helpful power of the soul for perceiving truth, for knowing God. A good place to start is the story in the autobiography of a yogi of the cauliflower robbery. This great crime takes place in the town of Puri on the east coast of India. Sri Yukteswar had his main hermitage in Serampore up near Calcutta. And Yogananda came to Sri Yukteswar after his high school graduation to live with him and be with his training. And the first summer that came, they went down to the Puri ashram with the other disciples. And after they arrived there, they went out the next day walking toward the beach. And Sri Yukteswar said to Yogananda, did you remember to lock the back door of the hermitage? And Yogananda said, I think so, sir. Sri Yukteswar paused for a moment and said, no, you forgot. You must be punished. I forgot to say that coming down to Puri, Yogananda had brought with him 6 cauliflowers that he had grown in Calcutta for Sri Yukteswar and presented them to him. And Sri Yukteswar said, "You must be punished. Your 6 cauliflowers will soon be only 5. And Yogananda didn't know what this meant, and he didn't really understand, but they went on for a while. And then when they were coming back to the hermitage, Sri Yukteswar said, "Stop. Now I want you to look across that field toward the hermitage. You see on that distant road over there, there's a crazy man walking." And he was coming and he was waving his arms meaninglessly and just meandering down the road. And he went on down the road and he passed behind a wall and was out of sight. And Sri Yukteswar said, but wait, this man will return. He will be the means of your chastisement, Yogananda." And sure enough, the man came back and he was still waving his arms, but this time he had a little bit of a sense of what he was doing. And he came into the yard near the hermitage and he went over to the back door and he went in the door, which Yogananda had left unlocked. And everybody stood and watched. And a couple minutes later, he comes out bearing a cauliflower with a great sense of pride and satisfaction. Yogananda stood up and began to run to get his cauliflower. Sri Yukteswar laughed, said, "No, come back." He said, "Come back." He said, "That man has had a hankering for a cauliflower. He had a deep desire, and I thought he should get one of yours, so ill-guarded." Later, Yogananda noticed that, in fact, one of the cauliflowers, which he had hid under the bed, were missing, but the money and the gold watch and things that he had were sitting a lot on the bed. But the man must have had a vegetable fixation, he said. He asked Sri Yukteswar the meaning of this story, and Sri Yukteswar said, I'll tell you later. And then Yogananda goes on to say that a few years later, when the wonders of radio burst upon the world, it became clear to him that Sri Yukteswar used his mind like a radio receiver to tune in to the thoughts of that crazy man. He picked up the desire of the cauliflower on the part of that man. And not only did he receive those thoughts, but he used his mind as a broadcasting station to send out the message to the man of where to go to satisfy his desire to find a cauliflower. Now, this is a remarkable ability of the human mind. Sri Yukteswar was a master, and Yogananda later was a master and had all these same powers too, but he tells this story from the point of view of himself as a young man. The power of the mind to perceive truth and also to broadcast truth is a remarkable aspect of the wonder of the mind and the way God has set up this world. Intuition, the soul's power of knowing God, is the means by which we can perceive truth on levels that are far deeper than what we could perceive with our mind. Now, you all have undoubtedly experienced intuition. Very often people don't know when they have intuitive insights, when they have hunches, when they have thoughts of what they should do or how they should solve a problem. But the intuition is able to pierce through the fuzziness and vagueness of mental reasoning and thoughts and perceive truth. One of the most important ways for all of us is how we came on to the spiritual path. Maybe the first time we read a book like The Autobiography of a Yogi, or Kriyananda's book, The Path. Maybe the first time we heard Ananda music, or even as a young age, hearing stories from the Bible, going to some church or some gathering where something really touched you, and you thought, this makes sense to me. This is what I want. This is the truth that I'm looking for. That comes not from reasoning. Oh yeah, I always thought it should be like this and that and this and that. And because they said that here, that must be right. But it's the intuition that grasps the fact that this is real for me. This is what I want. This is the home that I've been looking for. And we follow that intuition. And meditation is the most important technique for developing and improving intuition. Lahiri Mahashaya said, solve all your problems through meditation, meaning that by meditating, by getting calm in your mind, tuning into your heart, that develops and opens the intuition, and you can perceive answers to problems that have been bothering you. One of the favorite stories of mine that helped me come onto the spiritual path was a story about Ram Dass, an American psychology professor, finding his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, in India and coming onto the spiritual path. And this story took place back in the late 60s. And Ram Dass, who was known as Richard Alpert, was a fairly well-known psychology professor who was doing experimentation with psychogenic drugs, LSD and things. And he and Timothy Leary had been doing a lot of these experiments and things with people, but they were getting to the point where they didn't really know what the next step was. They didn't really know where this was going, whether these drugs were powerful in unlocking some kind of consciousness, states of consciousness. But they didn't understand, and they thought, who would know? And Richard Alpert thought, I'm going to go to India and try to find a holy man there who might be able to tell me what this is all about. And he did that. He went to India, and he was traveling around, and he didn't find what he was looking for. And at the point that this story takes place, he was using a Land Rover that a friend had lent him, and he had a friend with him who was traveling, and they'd been taking some various drugs, and he was getting tired, and he wasn't really finding, he was disappointed, not finding what he's looking for and everything else. And so he was getting to a low point in his trip. And then his friend said, I really need to go to find my guru, who's in some remote place in northern India, because I need his help with getting my passport, my visa renewed. So Ram Dass thought, well, he wasn't Ram Dass then. He got that name later, but I'll call him Ram Dass. He said, okay, well, let's go. So they got in the Land Rover, and they were driving north and trying to find this place. At one point, they spent the night in some kind of a hostel, and Ram Dass went out in the middle of the night. And he was under the stars looking up and thinking about his mother, who had died the previous year. She'd had a spleen infection or something, and she died. And he was thinking about that. And then they got in the Land Rover the next day, and they continued. And they had trouble finding the place, but eventually they pulled up to this little village, and the guy, his friend, gets out and says, where is Maharaji? And they said, oh, he's up on the hillside, around the far side of this hill, you know. And so they went up this hill and around the side, and there was a field, and there was a little man on a blanket sitting. And his friend, Ram Dass's friend, runs up, and he throws himself on the ground, and he clutches his guru's feet, and he says, oh, Guruji, I'm so happy to see you. Maharaji, please help. I'm so happy to be here. And he's crying, and Ram Dass is standing there watching and says, I'm not going to get down there and touch his feet. And Ram Dass is, again, he's discouraged. He doesn't really know what's happening. He's way out here in the mountains. The guru looks at him, and he says, through a translator, he says, you came here in a big car? And Ram Dass says, yes. He says, you will give me Land Rover? And Ram Dass says, I came from a Jewish family, and we were involved in fundraising and stuff, but I'd never seen hustling like this before. And his friend is on the ground. Oh, Maharaji, if you want the Land Rover, we'll give it to you. Ram Dass is like, no, we can't give it to him. It doesn't even belong to us. Everybody's sort of laughing, and Ram Dass is feeling more uncomfortable than ever. And the guru looks at him in the eyes, and he says, you were out under the stars last night. And Ram Dass thinks, how could he have known that? You know, but really, that's not a bad guess. Anybody could have been under the stars last night. He says, yes. He says, you were thinking about your mother. And Ram Dass's mind starts to go real fast. How could he have known that? I didn't say anything to anybody. How could he know this? And he says, yes. He said, she died last year. And he says, yes. And then he said, she died of, and he stopped for a minute and he said in English the word spleen. And Ram Dass broke down and was crying. And he said he felt a wrenching pain in his heart. And his mind went faster and faster trying to figure out, how could this guy, he can't press a button and FBI files come up with all these things. There's no way that could happen. How could he have known that? And he just burst out crying. Well, I heard a tape of this story, a cassette recording of this story, some months later or a year later in my dorm room at college in Maine. And I broke down crying. I had the same reaction. It's hard to describe. Here is a little man sitting on a blanket on a hillside in India, and he knew Ram Dass's innermost thoughts. This is an aspect of God being omnipresent and omniscient. And this is something which the human mind has no explanation for whatsoever. How can God, how can an individual in tune with God know your thoughts like that? There's many stories in the autobiography of a yogi of different saints reading people's minds. And I'd actually read a little bit of the autobiography of a yogi, but not enough to really help me through this. Anyway, I, like Ram Dass, was deeply touched by that story. To me, that was the proof that God existed, that there was some higher power, that not only was it knowledgeable about Ram Dass, not only did Maharaji know Ram Dass's thoughts, but Ram Dass must have picked up on the love that Maharaji was bestowing on Ram Dass. Maharaji, God would have known that here was a person that I've helped in past lives, and they're not on the path in this life, but those were the words that he said to him in order to help him realize that this was his home, this was his spiritual home. And that's what Ram Dass said. I felt like I was coming home. And so he ended up staying there for months at a time. He became a devotee, he became a disciple. The story goes on from there. But the same thing happened with me when I heard this story. I was so blown away. I was walking around in circles in my dorm room listening to this tape, and I was so blown away. I couldn't have explained any part of this. I tried sharing this with my roommates. They could care less. To me, I did the only thing that made sense for me to do at that point. I dropped out of college. I gave away all my possessions. I started to hitchhike to get a West Coast, to get a freighter to India to find a guru. I became a vegetarian. I started to try to meditate with no success whatsoever. I started doing a mantra. I had a relationship with God from that point on, and I was a completely different person. I didn't make it very far across the country on my way to India. I made it a few hundred miles, and then I got cold feet or whatever and came back, but I was a different person. I was on the path from there on. And 8 years later, I came to Ananda Village, because my cousin, Betsy Barrett, whom some of you might know by the name of Duty at present, called me up and said, "Hey, Larry, I'm out here at Ananda Village. You should come here. I think you would like it." She also sent my mother a copy of Swami Kriyananda's book, The Path. By that point, I'd read the autobiography twice, but it still hadn't really kicked in for me. I don't know what was wrong with me. It wasn't the right time, whatever. But she sent my mother a copy of The Path here in Rhode Island, and I picked it up and she lent it to me, and I began reading it as I was driving across the country. I was going to go to a lot of different places and check this Ananda place out as well. But as I was reading parts of The Path every day, I ended up making a beeline. And so thank you again, Duty, for getting me to Ananda Village. But that was my spiritual awakening with Ram Dass. Now, one other story about intuition that I'd like to tell is happened in 1998 when I had been at Ananda some 20 years, and Premshanti and I had been married for
8 years.
8 years, and we went on a pilgrimage to India. And we went to the various places that Yogananda had lived, including the Puri Ashram, where the cauliflower robbery took place, and numerous places, including his boyhood home in Calcutta. And at his boyhood home, at the end of the 3.5-week pilgrimage, one of the highlights is going up 2 by 2 with Durga and Vidura, some of the leaders of the pilgrimage, to renew our vows of discipleship to Yogananda and this path in Yogananda's attic room where he said he found God. It's a little room that was up on the roof of the house in the days when he was there, and the house has been sort of built up around it some, but it's still a small little room. So there's only room for 2 people at a time to go up with Durga and Vidura, and they would read the discipleship vows and we'd renew our vows. And Premshanti and I were waiting in the lower room for our turn to go up. And I remembered my mother, whose name was Hope, who was a Quaker and a very spiritual, religious sort of woman. She was just my mom most of my life, all of my life. But she had actually been interested in this path. She'd come and visited Ananda Village several times, and she had actually taken the discipleship initiation to Yogananda. Well, I was her not very tuned in, appreciative son, and didn't really acknowledge that very much. I thought it was a good thing that, but I didn't really help her that much. We would go back and visit and chant and meditate with her. But sitting in that upstairs room at Yogananda's house, I remembered my mother. And I remembered that although she was now in a nursing home because she had some kind of dementia and she was not really able to take care of herself much anymore, I realized that she's going to pass away perhaps in the next few. The most important thing she did in her life was to take discipleship to a great guru like Yogananda. And what have I done to assist her in that? Not very much. So I said, I am going to take this discipleship initiation upstairs in a few minutes with Premshanti on one side, and I'm going to visualize my mother Hope on the other side. So we went up there and we did that. We took the initiation, and I was strongly thinking about my mother. A couple of days later, on one of the last nights of the pilgrimage, we were up in Darjeeling near the Tibetan border, and I meditated, and I had this idea that my parents had wanted me to inherit this property in Hopkinton that they owned. And I had said, my life is Ananda. I'm not interested in that property. I would probably just sell it and stuff. And although Premshanti has in fact suggested this, when I had that meditation, it came to me very strongly that we could take that property and make an Ananda retreat center with it. And that is basically what happened. That was one of the strongest intuitions of my life. For my whole time at Ananda Village, I had been telling various spiritual leaders there, why don't we have something in New England? We ought to have a retreat center. We ought to have some kind of an Ananda center in Maine or in New England or something. And here was an opportunity. And we came back from that trip, and I spoke with Premshanti, and she was semi-open to the idea. She didn't really want to leave Ananda Village and go traipsing off to Rhode Island to some little place in the woods. Didn't seem like a very practical idea. But we had been going back and visiting the meditation groups in Maine and New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Long Island, various groups that we knew existed. And one thing led to another. I spoke with my father, who was in his 80s, and he didn't want to mess around with anything. He had tenants that were in the house next door that was the property, and he would have to ask them to leave, which he did, and he would have to give us some cash to get started with, which he did. And we had to go out and incorporate the Ananda Church of Rhode Island, which we did. Jaya, Helene, and I came out on an exploratory visit, and everything seemed to be going well. We had a meeting back at the village with various community leaders, and everybody was sort of in favor of the the idea, and there was no real obstacle, no real problem. And poor Premshanti went, "Oh my gosh, I'm moving to Rhode Island." And that's what happened. We came about 6 months later. We moved here into Hopkinton. We took over the land and the little house. I had had grandiose plans about building a big retreat center out in the meadow in the middle of the woods with a sort of like the expanding light at Ananda Village, which would have cost $750,000. And people had to say, "Well, you know, you're thinking too big, Omprakash. You gotta make it practical. Take a small step." And so we started with a 30-foot yurt. That was our temple for the whole time we were there. We had tents for people to stay in. The next spring, a carpentry crew came and added a significant living room, kitchen addition onto the main house. A couple of years later, we took the small barn building that was there and made it into a guest house. And over the course of the next 9 years, many people came. Many people, several people here took their first Kriya in that temple. And it was a wonderful time for us. It was a joyful time of serving and spreading in this work. And it was my dream come true. And eventually things didn't really work out to be building a New England-wide work there as much. And Jaya and his wife, Sadhana Devi, were asked to go to India, where a big work was happening there. And we were back to just ourselves, and things were okay, but they weren't great. And eventually Jyotish and Devi and Swami asked us to move back to Ananda Village or Seattle. We ended up going to Seattle and selling the property. But by the grace of God, some of the local people who had been part of when we were running the retreat, especially in the last couple of years, we had many successful retreats. They weren't real big, but we'd have people come from all over the Northeast. We did the shopping, we did the cooking, we did the making of the beds, we did the registration, we did everything. We did all the classes for many of them. We had a lot of visiting teachers, but we did most of the classes. And we'd give the Sunday service, and after all that came Sunday service lunch, by which time we were so wiped out that it was tremendously helpful that this increasing group of local people, including Kyle and Jane and Giovanna was already living with us. She was on the staff there. We had a number of people come and bring potluck lunch things so that we didn't have to make lunch. Well, that group that was bringing the lunches was developing such a strong magnetism that when we left and said goodbye, Ram was still there, and he was continuing to do some Sunday services. Moved to Kelly's house for a little while, and then to Roy, had a barn that was off just around the corner, a mile or two away in Hopkinton. And eventually this building was purchased, and we had the great joy of seeing that the seeds that we planted actually sprouted and grew and flowered and blossomed. Thank you very much to Kyle and Giovanna and Kelly and Roy and everybody who's helped build. And now Duty doing the music, and everybody's doing well here. And there's a wonderful career retreat next week. In Connecticut.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was my big intuition experience. But intuition happens and is helpful also in many small day-to-day things. Intuition comes from God. When you pray, when you love God, when you meditate, your intuition naturally develops. Love for God is one of the most important things that all of us can do. Whatever your idea of God, of the divine, whether it's the Heavenly Father or a Divine Mother, whether it's a formless idea of God just everywhere, whether it's crystallized in the forms or the incarnations of Jesus and Babaji and Krishna and the different masters of our path, of Yogananda, whatever your sense of connection with the divine, it's important, it's very important to find ways to deepen that relationship, to strengthen your connection with the divine, to increase your heart's love and devotion. God is joy. God is the joy that is within you. In the autobiography of a yogi, Yogananda writes, the Lord made all people from the limitless joy of his being. He goes on to say, it is the Spirit of God that directly sustains every form and force in the universe. Yet he is transcendental and aloof in the blissful, uncreated void beyond the worlds of vibratory matter. And God is aloof and transcendental and way beyond everything, but he is also becomes very personal for each one of us. For Ram Dass on that hillside, Divine Mother speaks to each of us in the language of our hearts. And the more we can deepen that relationship, the more we can find those ways that help us to be inspired, that help us to be uplifted. Books, music, satsang, being with groups of like-minded people. The spiritual path is a step-by-step process of coming closer to God and opening your heart and welcoming his guidance and his love. And it's a journey that just gets better and better. The joy and the devotion one feels over the course of time just keeps growing and growing. And we are all rising and uplifting ourselves day by day in the great journey to come back to God, to come back to divine bliss, our true home. Blessings to all of you.
We'll give you a chance to make an offering. Hold what you'd like to give in your right hand, and we'll pray together. Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
bless this offering.
bless this offering.
May it serve as a vehicle
May it serve as a vehicle
of awakening many souls
of awakening many souls
to God's presence in our lives and in this world. Om, peace. Amen. Sing.
We'd love to sing another song for you, If You're Seeking Freedom. If you're not, you don't need to listen. If you're seeking freedom, in
So we will have our Festival of Light soon, but I just wanted to share a little something with you. I discovered something that I'd taken away with me when we left here a few years ago that I wanted to, that actually came to me in an intuition to give back to you. And what this is, there's a little card here. This was sent to us from Nyaswamis, Ananda and Maria. And Maria is one of the Nyaswamis that will be leading the Kriya retreat. So you'll know that this is coming from them. Back in those days, we were Karen and Larry. So this is their little card to us. Dear Karen and Larry, blessings. Thought you'd enjoy having these flowers from a garland blessed by Ananda Moy Ma for the center there. May God's work through you flourish and nourish souls. We also hear great things and are excited that Swamiji will be spending so much time there. He came 2 or 3
times.
He came 3 times. Boundless joy, light, and grace, Ananta and Maria. So she actually made this little card and wrote this in here. And then there's a little box that she put the little Om sign on. And inside are the flowers. So we would like to dedicate these to you guys. And Kyle said that she's going to make a special little altar for you. So the Divine Mother can be here more strongly with all of you. So there you go. You're welcome.